up to a full dose, which after 3 or 4 months, you're eating 1,000 fewer calories a day. 1,000 fewer calories a day on average. No wonder you see this massive rapid weight loss. But then your body fights back. Only about 1 in 25 people who go on these drugs actually achieve a normal weight. But compare that to not taking these drugs, less than 1 in 100 people starting out obese actually make it down to a normal weight.
Welcome back to the show, Dr. Greger, for what is this, like maybe the third time, second time?
Oh, it's been too long.
Yeah, it's been
way too long. How many books do I got to write? Come on.
Yeah. Got to get you on for every single book, at least, and then some, because I'm sure there's a lot of topics we could cover. We could probably talk forever. But this time around, you whipped out a book on Ozempic, which I was just saying I was not expecting. So it's called Ozempic Risks, Benefits, and Natural Alternatives to GLP-1 Weight Loss Drugs. Why did you write this? It's kind of a departure from the how to not die and all that stuff.
It's been years since Ozempic was approved as a weight loss drug, and absolute crickets on nutritionfacts.org. Literally, we didn't do anything. And it's because it was just like an intimidating topic. There are literally thousands of articles on these drugs, which have actually been around for decades as diabetes drugs. And it was just like, I wanted to do, I wanted to give it a really kind of a fair shake. I really wanted to go deep. I really wanted to understand and kind of cut through all the hype. And I knew to do that, it would really deserve a deep dive, which I just never had time for. But now I'm just between books. I was like, this is, if I don't do Ozempic now, I'm never going to freaking do it. This is ridiculous that I don't have anything on this.
You don't take Ozempic?
Embarrassing that I didn't have anything on these. And so I was like, all right, let's do this. And so I did this. I think it comes out to be like a 24 video series. And so I did all this research, put out, we're doing a webinar on it. But I was like, well, look, I already did all this work. Why don't I kind of self-publish it as a book? Normally going through regular publishing route, it's like a year. You finish something and it comes out a year later. It's like, no, that's bull. I want it out now. Mm-hmm. And now with self-publishing craziness, like you can like write something, next day, boom, it's a book. Yeah. Right. And so softcover, ebook, audiobook, and we're like, let's just get it out there, because it's one thing. Yeah, you can watch the videos, but here's all the citations. I thought, look, let's get this information out in as many different formats as possible.
Well, awesome. That's a crazy turnaround. I mean, I just write little ebooks here and there, so I'm very much admire your ability to just crank out like massive books with hundreds of references and all that stuff. So yeah, obviously that's Amazon if you guys want to check it out. But we have a bunch of questions here. I previously, some of you saw, I did like a natural Ozempic video where I compared the Broad study or Broad study. People have told me different ways of pronouncing it from New Zealand. And comparing the weight loss as body percentage. So you're talking about not just taking the drug here, but you're also looking at alternatives. So I'm assuming, you're talking about diet all the time. So I'm assuming you're covering diet, and maybe you have at one point compared Ozempic to lifestyle interventions. Do you have anything about that you want to cover?
Yeah. I talk about basically how obesity is such a devastating disease in terms of even just looking at lifespan, cutting maybe 6-7 years off people's life, that, you could have a risky drug that like cuts years off your life, and still it would be beneficial overall to take it. I think of these drugs kind of like bariatric surgery. People kind of think, getting your digestive tract rearranged is like a 1 in 1,000 chance you literally die on the table. These are risky surgeries, and there's like lots of complications and also blah, blah, blah. But guess what? It's still, like in the Swedish obesity subject study, still extends your life compared to people who didn't get bariatric surgery. Still, your cancer rates go down. In fact, half the cancer rates. Now, this wasn't an interventional study. It couldn't randomize people to get obesity to get surgery or not. But people who generally the same kind of demographics, the same amount of weight, but follow people who go through bariatric surgery, lose significant amount of weight versus those that don't. And significant benefits, lifespan, cancer, cardiovascular disease, etc., on down the list. Now, am I encouraging people to get bariatric surgery? Well, it's like, okay, if you are unable or unwilling to treat the underlying cause of your obesity, then actually it's better for you to get bariatric surgery, lose that weight, than it is to maintain that higher level of obesity for the rest of your life. The stats, seem pretty clear. And with these drugs, you can actually do randomized controlled trials and actually prove cause and effect in terms of some of the health benefits. We only have kind of a few years out, but for example, for people with cardiovascular disease, prior cardiovascular disease and obesity, taking these drugs, 1.5% absolute risk reduction of having another heart attack, stroke, dying from a cardiovascular disease event over the next few years. That's basically like statin drugs, right? Now, maybe on a personal level, that's not very convincing, but on a population scale, could save thousands of lives, right? Now, then the question becomes, okay, but is there any way to get the benefits without the risks? And so that's really the second half of the book where I talk about, all right, what are the most effective lifestyle behaviors? And what role does GLP-1 play in some of these weight loss from, diet and exercise? And so that's how the kind of two halves of the book are broken up.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I did. Was it you who made the analogy of a lot of times the standard American diet is like you're just slamming your shin against the coffee table?
Yes, yeah, coffee table.
Yeah, so the coffee table analogy, I was kind of thinking it's like if you're taking one of these semaglutide, people are saying different. It sort of seems to me like you're slamming your shin not quite as hard against the coffee table because of course your appetite gets suppressed and you're not eating as much. And so that's interesting. It's all about what you're willing to change, I think. And sadly, I can imagine obviously people are addicted to different foods and things like that, and it's almost like it's a drug for addiction as much as anything else. And then I was going to ask I have a couple goofy questions here. First off, is Ozempic face real?
Oh, yeah, Ozempic face is not only real, and it's not just what I thought going into it. Oh, it's just loss of fat in the face. Like, I mean, people have such remarkable rapid weight loss. Well, they're just kind of looking gaunt because they're losing fat in their face. But no, it actually goes beyond that. One of the things that surprised me, normally when you lose weight, about 25% of the weight you lose is actually in lean mass, fat-free mass. So you lose weight with caloric restriction or bariatric surgery or kind of any way you want to do it, portion control. You lose 4 pounds on the bathroom scale. 3 of those pounds are fat. 1 of those pounds is lean mass. But for these GLP-1 drugs, completely different. Unlike other ways of losing weight, 40% of the weight you lose is actually lean mass. Wow. Now, the drug manufacturers argue, hey, you're still losing more fat than you are lean mass. So overall, your ratio is better, which, look, that's legitimate. But there's remarkably more lean mass loss. And the concern, if there's some weight cycling going on, like if there's a shortage of the drug or you stop the drug for whatever reason, you can't afford it, the weight comes back on, the fat comes back on, but all the muscle mass might not. And so every time you do it, you're losing more and more. Your ratio is getting worse and worse. But anyway, so part of the changes in your face actually is due to loss of musculature as well. And so that's why it's a little different than just losing weight by other means.
Wow, that's wild. Yeah, so I was also thinking in terms of what I was talking about, survival and having muscle mass for survival. I guess, do you feel like that's a concern? People who are maybe a little bit older taking Ozempic and then losing too much muscle mass and then not having, you feel like that's association anyway?
So frailty frailty as measured by grip strength, for example, is associated with lower grip strength, more frailty associated with premature death. But you can imagine all sorts of confounding factors that make it difficult to prove cause and effect in that case.
Yeah. Okay. And then I just realized we didn't even explain what these GLP-1 drugs do exactly. Do you have a little nutshell version for people that just have no idea what we're talking about?
So people don't understand that the digestive tract is actually the primary hormone manufacturer in the body. There's 20 different hormones made by the digestive tract. About 1 in every 100 cells lining the digestive tract produces some point of hormone, often as a part of a nutrient sensing. So basically, there are these so-called L cells located at the end of your digestive tract that detect calories, any kind of macronutrient, and in response, be like, "Oh, you're eating lots of food. Okay, let's dial down your appetite so you don't eat too much." You say, "Well, wait a second. If this hormone, if you have this whole satiety appetite suppression circuit, why do we have an obesity epidemic?" And the reason is because the foods we eat today are absorbed high up in the small intestine. Right? These are fiber strip foods, ultra processed foods, or animal foods, which aren't enclosed in that fiber cell wall. And so they get absorbed way up in the small intestine. Very little residue makes it down to the lower intestine. And so our body's like, oh my God, we're like in a famine situation. This person is not eating food because our body didn't evolve in a context of there being such a thing as massive amounts of fiber-free plant foods. And so So we're undercutting our natural kind of satiety circuit, but we can reestablish that satiety circuit by eating whole intact plant foods. And then all of a sudden we're getting food going all the way down to the end of our small intestine. We can activate GLP-1. And so that's part of the natural alternative section. Why plant-based diets have been found to be so effective in producing weight loss, maybe through, in part, a GLP-1 mechanism.
Yeah, that's wild. And then, of course, I've seen your videos on short-chain fatty acids like propionate triggering satiety. Is that connected at all? Is that connected?
Oh my God, so cool. So cool.
Yeah.
You can stick propionate in people's butts and get a big boost in GLP-1. You can get them to lose weight, to reduce their appetite, you stick propionate in people's butt, which is a postbiotic, which is produced by your fiber feeders. When we eat fiber, they produce propionate, gets absorbed through our gut wall, circulates throughout our system, crosses the blood-brain barrier, and you put propionate in people's butts. You put them in a brain scanner, show them a picture of a donut, and you get less activation of the reward pathways. It just doesn't look as appetizing, helps cut down your cravings. Now, rather than the bottoms up approach, I encourage the top down approach by actually eating fiber rich foods. Although there is kind of a third way, kind of a sneaky way, and that's consuming vinegar. The acetic acid in vinegar is turned into acetate, which is one of these beneficial postbiotics, and you can get similar levels of acetate in your bloodstream taking, a teaspoon of vinegar that you would get eating, like a big, fiber-filled muffin or something. Eventually produced in your colon. Just make sure you never consume vinegar straight, always diluted in water, sprinkle on a salad or something. You don't want to burn your digestive tract, your esophagus.
Yep. And so I should just announce it here first. Propionate in the butt. We're launching a joint product called Poopionate. This is actually us announcing that right now to replace the GLP-1. No, obviously I'm totally joking. Yeah, no, vinegar continues to amaze me there. Acetate,
crazy.
There could be another joke there with the acetate. We'll cut it off there. Oh man, so yeah, that's really interesting, all the mechanisms, and thankfully I've learned a lot from you about that. So another one, so you mentioned a little bit about the media and their role in this, I think perhaps in your description of your book. So I was wondering if you have anything to say about the media and Ozempic and these GLP-1 drugs. Are they being pushed on too many people more than it should be? Is it like an easy way out?
Yeah, so I have a whole section talking about kind of the big pharma manipulation of big media. So, for example, there was this, I don't know if people saw the 60 Minutes episode, talked about Ozempic. Only did we find out later it was basically a paid promotion. Ozempic basically paid for this, paid for this ad and they've paid for editorials in all these major papers, and they've hid their conflicts of interest, and basically done typical shady big pharma stuff. In fact, so shady that the producer of Ozempic actually was kicked out of the pharma trade group in the UK because they were doing shady stuff in terms of concealing their interests. I mean, nothing more than you'd expect. I mean, the two companies now make the two leading GLP-1 drugs have a combined worth of $1 trillion. And so it's just like, so I do a lot of comparisons with some of these past weight loss drugs, which were heralded as their wonder drugs at the time. Most of which, of course, pulled from the market for only later turning out to be a public health threat. And it took an average for 10 years before the first signs of danger arose, and then another 10 years on average for them to actually be pulled from the market. In one case, 38 years on the market, causing all sorts of terrible things before we finally figured it out. So like Fen was, had these heart valve problems. In fact, there's just recently there was a drug pulled from the market, actually very similar. It was marketed as a diabetes drug and then kind of remarketed originally as a diabetes drug, remarketed as an appetite suppressant. And the company was found to be suppressing. They knew that it was killing people for decades, and we just kind of and they hid it. But they were fine. It was one of the biggest fines ever. It was $500 million fines. But then you do the math. How much they were making like $20 million a year, and they marketed for this many years, and it was like, yep. And so they just like they still come out like bandits, and you're like,
it's just part of the budget.
Right. So you can actually, right. So you can basically like, okay, we know we're going to get sued for causing this amount of, chaos, but it's going to make sense at the end. These are hugely a profitable drug. So you're just concerned that because, of course, who's responsible for proving the safety of drugs? Drug companies themselves. They have put them in charge, and you can argue that's good or bad. I mean, what's good about it is they're paying for it, right? As opposed to taxpayer dollars. It'd be nice. People are like, well, oh my God, that's like such foxes in the henhouse. Proving drugs should be an independent party, like the FDA should prove drugs. Oh yeah, but then you're talking about taxpayer dollars, basically enriching these companies. Like we're spending millions of dollars to prove these drugs are safe that are then, privatizing all the profits. So, I mean, they are the ones spending all this money, proving the efficacy, proving the safety, but then you're left kind of thinking, oh, are they hiding anything? And we just have case after case in which it was, and with the stakes so incredibly high at this point, you could just imagine that the incentives are aligned in such a way that we may not have the full picture.
Can't they find a middle ground where the company has to pay just like either a government agency or an independent?
Oh, juicy radical. You radicals, I tell you.
The lobbying, I don't think would let that happen. But do you feel like there are any red flags that we're seeing yet? Because so far, we're generally seeing data showing good things. I've also seen studies on good heart failure outcomes, chronic kidney disease, and the one even with Alzheimer's, it was associated with 40 to 70% reduced risk of first-time Alzheimer's disease diagnosis. And so we have positives we're seeing for these other diseases, but do you feel like we could have that red flag starting to come up, or do you think we're gonna have to wait 10 years until we find a heart issue?
These drugs have been around for about 20 years as diabetes drugs. Now, it was at a different dose, and these are different drugs. We have new drugs, and Ozempic semaglutide is actually at a higher dose, and so we're kind of early days in terms of long-term outcomes. I mean, the short-term side effects are enough that half of people stop these drugs within 2 months, which is that's even before you even ramped up to like the active dose. And this was in a group of patients that had the drug paid for. So it wasn't because it was just so expensive, but because of the side effects. So these are gastrointestinal side effects, vomiting, diarrhea, nausea, where, 80% stopping these drugs within 6 months. But if you are able to stay on these drugs, then you have this dramatic weight loss that plateaus, unfortunately, after a year, such that if you do 4-year studies injecting yourself every single week, you don't lose a single more pound for the subsequent 3 years. Wow. And so you're basically injecting these drugs every day for the rest of your life to not get any more weight loss. And so you start out obese, and in every single major study end up on average obese, and then you just have to inject the drug for the rest of your life to maintain that lesser level of obesity. But guess what? Being less obese has all sorts of significant health advantages. The question is, what are the disadvantages? And again, always have to compare it to the disadvantages of obesity. Like, okay, yeah, so it probably causes thyroid cancer. There's a black box warning. But, you don't want cancer? Well, then you don't want obesity. That's what you don't want to have. And like bariatric surgery, may cut cancer rates in half. And so, yes, even if it does cause thyroid cancer, which apparently it does, even if it causes pancreatic cancer, is a very serious cancer, one would still expect an overall reduction in cancer risk if indeed people are able to maintain the level of weight loss. And so one always has to kind of, balance that. All the major rare serious side effects like bowel obstruction, where it slows down your digestive tract so much, you can actually paralyze your digestive tract and can be a surgical emergency, less than 1% a year. Pancreatitis can be kind of a serious painful ailment, less than 1% a year. And so even though, there's common gastrointestinal side effects, they tend to be mild. You can kind of ameliorate them by starting low and going slow in terms of ramping up a dose. We don't have long-term side effects, but within a few years, you see these beneficial health outcomes because you're losing weight. And then it leaves you, well, is there any other way we can get people to lose weight without having to either rearrange their digestive tract or to take these drugs?
And get some positive side effects with the diet. But I want to...
Positive side effects? Now you're talking super crazy.
Yeah, erectile dysfunction going away. How about that? Well, we need more... I would love to see more erectile dysfunction related studies. It's going to be the most persuasive thing. But you said something back there that I was
Why do you want erectile dysfunction studies so much? For a friend?
Is that constantly... Yeah, for a friend. No. No, because the Game Changers came out and it got so many people hyped.
Oh yeah, no, I love it. Yeah, yeah.
400% increase in these young athletes, like overnight erections, and then we're like, oh, maybe we're gonna publish the data soon. And I'm just like, crickets there. Just me for making the case for people. But
oh no, yeah, no, absolutely. We need more data.
yeah, no, I'm good in that department. But I want to go back to your talking about this plateau that we see. So we see this plateau. You said it was after a few years. Is that because GLP-1 is only, or these agonists are only able to suppress people's appetite to a point where maybe instead of eating 4,000 or 5,000 calories a day, they're still eating 3,500 calories a day, or do they just lose efficacy, or what is the reason there?
So 1 year. So we have a 1 year plateau.
1 year, not
in every study that's been done. Between 10 and 12 months, you have a plateau. And what happens? You start out, once you're ramped up to a full dose, which is after 3 or 4 months, you're eating 1,000 fewer calories a day. 1,000 fewer calories a day on average. No wonder you see this massive rapid weight loss. But then your body fights back. Your body fights back, and your appetite ramps up exponentially such that at the end of a year, you're only eating 400 calories less. Now, that's why you're maintaining that lower weight, because you're eating 400 calories less than you were at the beginning. But and the reason the reason your weight is stable is because your body actually needs 400 calories less to function, because you're so much lighter. You're so much smaller. You can imagine carrying like a 50-pound backpack around with you wherever you go. Every time you walk across the room, you're carrying a 50-pound backpack. And so you're actually expending more calories just living your life. And so when you lose weight, you actually need fewer calories to maintain that weight. And so with 400 calories less needed per day and 400 calories eating less per day, calories in equals calories out, and the weight loss plateaus until you stop the drugs, and then you lose that 400 calorie advantage, and then you go back up. Your appetite goes back up to where it started, and if you keep eating the same diet that you're eating before, your weight then comes up, and you lose all the benefits, blood pressure benefits, et cetera, on down the list.
You start slamming your shin harder and harder on the coffee table.
Then you're slamming just as much as you were slamming before.
Dang, yeah, that's rough. So is it fair to say that your body like actually chemically responds and chemically adapts, you're saying, as well, in terms of the efficacy of it?
Well, so, these, so you're getting this constant satiety signaling from GLP-1, but that's one of many. So we have evolved a variety of kind of backup systems, because we evolved in the context of scarcity. Because our number one problem, basically, for getting to reproductive age, pass along our genes, was just eating enough. So it was common that we'd go for days without eating. That's why we have this remarkable capacity to fast. And we can go literally, weeks without eating. Which is really a remarkable biological feat. That's because our body has all sorts of ways to maintain. And so we have this intense craving for calorie-rich foods, fatty foods, sugary foods, right? Because, again, evolved in the context of scarcity, you have to get enough calories. And so we have all sorts of redundant systems to measure appetite. So it's not just like, so we have, receptors in the wall of our stomach. And so when our stomach expands, we eat a lot of food, we get a little satiety signaling. Our tongue, the taste on our tongue sends satiety signals before any calories even make it into our system, being like, oh, we got some sugar coming in, we got something sweet. And so because we have all these redundant systems, even though we continue to get this high constant GLP-1 signaling, there's all sorts of other gastrointestinal hormones that are saying, wait a second, there's all sorts of other signals that our body's actually losing weight, and that kind of makes kind of a danger Will Robinson response. And so, but we don't go all the way back up. Our body is still fooled by that constant GLP-1 signal, such that we are eating less, but unfortunately not eating less enough to get down to a healthy weight in most people. Only about 1 in 25 people who go on these drugs actually achieve a normal weight. And you say, well, that's 4%, that's not great odds. But compare that to not taking these drugs. Less than 1 in 100 people starting out obese actually make it down to a normal weight within their lifetime. And so, that is kind of these are game-changing drugs. Never before have we seen this kind of weight loss with any other class of drugs. The question is, can we achieve a healthy weight in a healthy way with all those positive side effects?
Dang. Yeah, it's as if because of the food manufacturers and the processed foods, it's like our system is being hacked. All these things are survival mechanisms to eat as much as we know. These colorful foods, these salty foods, etc. That's being hacked, and so we just had to hack the other side of the system, which is kind of sad to say that we had to do that. But then I had another question here. And I have heard a little bit of people trying to get, it tends to be people with a little bit more money that can pay their doctor on the side of sort of just taking like vanity Ozempic, like maybe they're not that large. And so have you looked into that idea of just vanity Ozempic?
And they're doing it from compounding pharmacies, which is a concern I raised in the book. So there's actually a shortage of these drugs. They can't make these drugs fast enough. It's such that you can go to compounding pharmacies and kind of where they can kind of get this in bulk, and then you can kind of combine it in a vial, and then you can kind of inject yourself rather than having these kind of auto injectors. There's concerns historically about compounding pharmacies. There was this horrible case, this rash of fungal meningitis because, we had moldy bottles of drugs, and oh well. And so certainly there have been there have been warnings from the FDA not to go to compounding pharmacies, but of course people are like, screw you.
Yeah, they got to be
right. Yeah. So they're willing to pay. Now, none of the major studies have all been done on people that actually fit the indication for the drug, which is obesity or overweight obesity with some of these comorbidities. And so we actually don't have good data on what happens to people who are like just a little overweight or normal weight and want to look even skinnier. What happens when they take these drugs? Although we would presume we'd see similar things, although we wouldn't get the benefits, right? Because they're presumably their cardiometabolic risk isn't as bad. Presumably the risk benefit analysis would be shifted a little more in the risk direction.
Dang. Yeah, that's intense. And obviously there's all these, body image, societal pressures, eating disorders can almost manifest this way as well, which is kind of crazy. But another thing I'm personally really interested in, and I mentioned this in my video, is just things that naturally act on GLP-1. And I mean, one of those was fiber. One of those is sugar themselves. Have you looked at that? Or are you just like, good lifestyle is good lifestyle. We don't need to worry about the details. Or if you...
Oh yeah, no. There's some very specific things. In fact, regardless of what you eat, eating slower actually caused more GLP-1. And so the most famous study done was ice cream. They had people eat ice cream, the same amount of ice cream over 5 minutes or a half an hour, significantly more GLP-1, eating slower. So regardless of what you eat, eating slower and chewing more. So they compared people eating cabbage to people eating pureed cabbage, same amount of cabbage, significantly higher GLP-1 boosting with the chewing, and it was the same duration. So they paced out the cabbage smoothie such we had the same amount of cabbage, same amount of time. So we think actually the chewing maybe help with the GLP-1 signaling. And so, but then in terms of specific foods that help, there are 3 spices that have been shown to boost GLP-1 and actually translate into weight loss in meta-analyses, and that's cinnamon, turmeric, and cayenne pepper. We get the GLP-1, we get the appetite suppression, and that translates into weight loss on average. And then in terms of, I took this weird tangent into quinine in tonic water. So actually, quinine has a GLP-1 boosting effect, has a weight loss inducing effect, but has such potential for serious adverse side effects, which I had never heard about, that I actually recommend people don't go the quinine.
Platelet related things, I think, with those.
All sorts of crazy stuff. And so basically I do this big tangent and be like, okay, but don't do it, people. But then in terms of foods, groats and greens, I think, are the most powerful. So there are a bunch of foods that boost GLP-1, but we don't have subsequent data that actually shows at least a weight loss. Like that's what we want, right? It's like, it's not enough to show vinegar caused GLP-1. Does it actually, or even that vinegar reduces short-term energy intake, like at a meal a few hours later? I want to know, maybe your body kind of figures it out and then kind of counteracts the next day, you eat a few hundred calories more. You want to know over time, does it actually lead to weight loss? And look, there's some things that lead to weight loss, don't do anything, have nothing to do with GLP-1, but we want to know both GLP-1 and weight loss. We showed that with the spices, and there are a few foods, and the 2 big foods are groats and greens. Groats, because we have that intact whole food, feeding our microbiome, and the greens have these thylakoids, these chlorophyll-rich membranes that actually slow the digestion of fat, such that when we eat greens, actually more calories make it down to the end of our small intestine and have that GLP-1 boosting effect and that cravings reduction effect. An equivalent of half a cup of cooked spinach in the morning. Hours later in the afternoon, significant lower craving for chocolate because you had some greens for, in a green smoothie and breakfast or something. You can do randomized controlled trials with spinach powder basically mixed into jam or drinks. So you don't know who's in which group till you break the code at the end. And that then translates into appetite suppression, translates into weight loss. Yet another reason to eat your grains.
It's almost as if the foods that we ate in nature affect our appetite.
What a concept. It's right. It's almost as if the foods that we were designed to eat, that we evolved to eat, have the effect that we would presume, right? Eating the way nature intended, we are able to maintain health the way nature intended.
And then rewinding back, you said cinnamon was one. The question is it Ceylon cinnamon or is it the castor?
Oh, okay. So that's a good question. So this is 1 to 3 grams of cinnamon was the dose that led to weight loss. And a lot of these studies, they did not actually specify what type of cinnamon they're using. So it's possible that it was a coumarin effect, which is this kind of toxic compound that we really don't want. In so-called cassia cinnamon, the Chinese cinnamon, we really want that Ceylon cinnamon, which is, at least for safety. The question is there efficacy? In terms of blood sugar control, it's not clear. These weight studies, I looked into that, and unfortunately, they did not specify in most of these studies what kind of cinnamon they're using. So who knows?
Dang. And then in terms of vinegar, we have a lot of vinegar studies. Would we just see weight loss in the vinegar? If we don't see weight loss in the vinegar studies, then we can just presume that it's not doing enough to act on GLP-1 or...
Oh, we do see weight loss. I mean, the reason that vinegar has been used to treat obesity for centuries is indeed, and you can randomize people to vinegar drinks versus a placebo drink with a different kind of acid, so it tastes the same. You can't tell which is which, and you have a significant, and then you do the gold standard. You actually do MRIs. You actually look at how much visceral body fat. That's the dangerous fat. So gold standard method, randomized to vinegar drinks or not, significant drop in visceral fat and total body fat in the vinegar drinks compared to the exact same number of calories in a non-vinegar drink, with no other changes or requested changes in diet in either group. No changes in exercise, significantly more body fat reduction in the vinegar group. We think it's the acetic acid, which is turned to acetate in our body, has a similar effect as the acetate does that's produced by our fiber-feeding good gut bugs.
Okay, well, you heard it there. Then my last question before I let you go would be, if you were to just design a study that was comparing a whole food, a vegan or plant-based diet versus GLP-1, is there anything that you would be looking for in that design, or if anyone wants to pay for it, I'd be curious.
No. Well, right. Well, what we want is we want a ward study where we want to lock people up, or in the very least provide people food. It's all about compliance, right? We know these things work. It's like we go to the USPSTF, the Preventive Services Task Force, and they say that dietary counseling for obesity is not recommended. You're like, wait a second, are they saying diet has nothing to do with obesity? No, they're just saying dietary counseling doesn't work, right? Why? Because people don't actually change their diet. Right. And so it's just like smoking cessation doesn't work to improve people's lifespan because you randomize people to stop smoking and they don't stop smoking. So there's 2 questions. A, does it work? And B, can you actually get people to do it? I'm more interested in A than I am in B. Though when you do a ward study, you lock people up, feed them whatever you want, you have some amazing effect, then you have the problem with generalizability. Who cares if it works if no one's actually going to do it? I care if it works because there's some people who are motivated enough to take the science at face value and do good things for the health of themselves and their family.
All right. Well, I learned a lot. Hopefully you guys learned a lot too. Thanks so much. Check out Dr. Greger's new Ozempic book in the link below. I'll just link it below. It's an Amazon find right now, unless you're selling it directly on your site or anything like that. Just go to Amazon or what? Okay.
Yeah. Also sold nutritionfacts.org. That's where you can get the audiobook and like the EPUB. But if you want the Kindle version or you want the soft cover, you got to go to Amazon.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on again. I'm looking forward to the next one, the next book, which I'm sure you'll probably crank out in no time.
Next week.
Yeah, next week. Tomorrow we're going to be coming back on anyway. All right. Well, yeah, great to talk to you. And
thanks so much. Keep up the great work.